Smutton by Bert and Marie Lestrange, narrated by Jessica Miller. Chapter 1. Mayhem. Lightning cracked outside as a heavy summer storm turned the nearby parking lots to rivers. 3 blocks away, an ambulance collided head-on with a box truck carrying a wedding cake to the venue for a wedding that wouldn't be ruined for several hours. But I didn't hear any of it. Azel was a club that featured neon lights, lasers, misty fog, and a live DJ 3 nights a week. Drunken dancers in revealing clothing gyrated in a crowd that barely left enough room for us wallflowers. The whiskey glass in my hand had been empty for 10 minutes, but the clamoring bar was too daunting to navigate at the moment. A curvy woman in a short skirt and sweaty tank top caught my attention. Half due to the deep V barely capable of holding her cleavage in check, half due to her position among the herd. I wound my way to her like a salmon against the river's flow, placing my hand on her hip just as the young bar woman pointed to her for an order. "She'll have sex on the beach, heavy on the sex. I'll take Elijah Craig neat." Both women looked at me, one in shock at the audacity, the other in confirmation of the order. "Better make 'em doubles," I offered, holding out my card. The bartender shrugged, taking my payment before moving to the mixing station. "You've got a lot of nerve assuming my drink order," the woman said, tossing her crimson hair. I smirked, leaning in close so that my lips touched her ear. "Just wait until I tell you the things you're gonna do in my bed tonight." She couldn't contain the smirk and the game dissolved. "Find anything interesting?" she asked. I nodded. "A couple of cute pieces. There's a blonde over there who was 3 sheets half an hour ago. Another brunette who's been eyeing me between stuffing her tongue down throats. She isn't especially picky and bisexuous. She's been enjoying the lips of men and women tonight. I think either could be tempted. How about yourself?" Sliding a finger down the back of her skirt with one hand and wrapping the other gently against her neck, I kissed her forehead. The slightest of tingles ran up her thighs at his touch. Master was playful tonight. The cute bartender girl came back with our drinks, her unexpected wink towards me eliciting a chuckle from the hubs. Perhaps Karis had heard us discussing our little game. I giggled, licking a stowaway drop of whiskey that clung to my hubby's, Master's unruly mustache before pressing my tits against him, pulling his hips in towards mine at the same time. I held him to me as I danced, rocking my hips back and forth just the way I knew he liked it. I turned fast, brushing my wild curls against his face as I placed his hands on either side of my hips, bending low to wiggle my ass against the bulge waiting to greet me. He leaned back on the bar, completely unconcerned with the few stares that had landed on us. I like that one, locking eyes again with the beastly, rugged bear of a man that leaned against the wall just off of the dance floor. Reaching up to drag him back to the dance floor by his beard, I didn't tear my gaze from the dark and enticing presence that now watched us with intrigue. My newfound prey stared right back with a fierce intensity that was almost as stifling as the heat wafting off the sweaty, exhausted bodies that were pressed in close, dancing around us. I turned to look at Master, flicking my eyes back over towards the man on the wall. "How about a wifey sandwich tonight?" Master slid one hand up my shirt, expertly navigating under my bra to pinch my nipple. The little yelp that escaped my lips was drowned out by the rhythmic thumping of water surfacing them in Azul, but she knew he'd heard it. And the man she was targeting had watched it as well. He raised his eyebrows at her, drawing another long drink out of the thin black straw stuck in whatever fruity red drink he was sipping on. She liked a man in a bar that drank whatever the fuck he wanted. Master nuzzled the back of her head, drinking in the scent of his favorite curl cream that she'd used especially for him tonight. "I'm thinking more of a wifey cookie with extra cream in the middle," he laughed, kissing her on the cheek and biting his lower lip while he pulled her towards him again, holding her hips from behind just like he did when he fucked her. "Oh yes, tonight would be fun." Chapter 2. I took in the hunk she'd been teasing. A muscled frame that probably played tight end in high school. His beard wasn't half bad either. The guy who looks like he'd rather be chopping firewood than awkwardly staring down women in a bar? I asked. She spun, hand gently resting against my cock for a moment. "That's the one." Before I could respond, she'd returned her ass to my hips and was grinding again. I could tell she was winking at him from the way he kept raising his eyebrows. We'd shared a pair of sluts the last time we'd been hunting. That was her treat to me. I was open to rewarding her for her efforts. I grabbed a handful of her hair, wrenching it so that her cheek was against mine. Dude's a stud. Think he's hung like a horse or just built like one? She moaned while answering. Would Master like for me to find out? The way she used that word had always exhilarated me. Every yes sir and please daddy made me throb. I'm not sure if he's open to sharing. He might resist even your charm if I'm part of the package. Better make your offer a good one. Maybe a taste of what he might enjoy? I tugged her shirt with my free hand, peeling the near-sheer material away so that one plump breast rolled out. Instinctively, she stuffed it back in, but I knew he'd seen it, along with a dozen others who were giggling or staring with open mouths, as though questioning if they'd just seen what they'd seen. Releasing her hair and slapping her ass, I thrust my hips to send her on the way. If you want to woo that one, you're gonna have to dial your game up a notch. Fetch your toy, my little whore. I'll wait here. I might just scare him away. I flipped my curls out of the way, slicking the slightly sweating pieces framing my face behind my ears to try and pull myself together before sauntering over to the tall glass of homebrew with a hint of campfire smoke. His eyes had never left me, but oh how I had noticed the slight smile tugging edges of his mouth. I moved with the music, relishing the vibrating beat of whatever the hell these younger ones listen to these days. It wasn't even about the actual music for me. It was the feeling, the pulse, the risque ritual of losing yourself in the cacophonous symphony of sweaty, salacious sin. The pulsating congregation worshipping their vices and carnal desires, free of any inhibitions, thanks to copious drops of liquid courage. It was that same liquid courage and invigorating atmosphere that drove her straight to her intended prize and kiss him straight on his lips. How was that for dialing it up, babe? Whew, little lady, her fantasy bear murmured. Can't imagine that your man would approve of such a scene as that, would he? I stood up on the tips of my toes, even then just barely able to wrap my hands behind his neck and pull him down closer to me. Oh, but I have permission to do what I'd like, darlin'. I winked, absolutely astonished at my own words. My drink must have been filled with 2 shots of audacity topped with a hell of a lot of spice. For fuck's sake. He raised his eyebrows, tenderly placing his hands on my waist now. How funny they must look, standing as if slow dancing amidst the seizure-inducing strobe lights and neon lasers piercing through the artificial fog. And just what would you like, little lady? The way he muttered little lady nearly dropped me to the fucking floor. I'd loathe for you to join us elsewhere. The way her hips moved, swaying with the music, feeling it through her soul. I could have watched her for days. But the vision ended as she reached her lumberjack. Then that saucy little bitch stood on her tiptoes and kissed the man full on the mouth. If she'd used any amount of her talented tongue, I knew the brute was already hers. Watching her take what she wanted was a spectacle in its own right. So submissive and meek at any given moment, she'd proven more than capable of taking the reins when given permission. It was a good thing she wore a collar at home, because without direction, my wife would be a sexual hurricane, devastating anyone that piqued her interest. She would have decimated relationships by the handful. I'd done society a favor by taking her as my love slave. And that was the crux of it, my permission. Without it, my wife wouldn't have dreamed of touching another person. Well, perhaps wet dreaming even. Who doesn't have fantasies? But she wouldn't have acted on it. Now, with the green light, she was stroking the bulge at his inner thigh and biting her lip. I couldn't help but smirk at my little whore. Whatever he'd said had done a number on her. I knew the light wobble in her legs. Her panties would be soaked by now if they hadn't been already. The barmaid tapped me on the shoulder, staring openly at them. I think your girl found a new guy. I could be persuaded to offer a free drink if you'd be interested in getting coffee after we close. Peeling my eyes from the show my wife was putting on, I looked over my shoulder. The girl was cute in a pixie-like way, mousy hair with a thin build, lips that glistened with gloss. She winked and shrugged, offering my card back to me. I appreciate the consolation, but that woman is coming home with me, and if she has anything to say about it, so will he. I pushed the card back into her hand. Better hang on to that, mix up another of whatever he's having. I drained my glass and handed it over. And I'll take another single shot, something old and expensive, scotch or bourbon, anything small batch, really. She gaped at me. It was my turn to give her a wink. Shaking her head, she smirked. You're a kinky fucker, I like that. You don't know the half of it, I grinned. Turning back, I saw her lead him to a chair before shoving him down into it. Hiking up her skirt, she mounted him before pressing her lips to his. Her hands found his, one she slid inside her shirt, the other slipped under her skirt. I hoped he appreciated her lack of panties. Letting them play, I had a decent conversation with the girl. She gave me her number, just in case, and I sipped my drink. She sent the lumberjack's cocktail to him with a server, though he hardly had time to enjoy it, both hands being full. I swirled the ice and drained the last of it, a spicy blend with notes of cherrywood apple and dark toffee. Paying the tab and adding half again as a tip, I sauntered to the happy couple via the scenic route. As the night wore on, groups of two formed and the masses slowly trickled away, to cry or fuck, puke or jerk off alone. Coming from behind, I clapped a hand on the beefy bear's shoulder. It seems you're knuckle-deep in my wife, I growled, and felt him grow rigid. He stood, flipping my wife into the floor and holding up both hands defensively. I didn't mean no trouble, mister. That little lady came on to me. The patch of moisture highlighting his stiff cock was almost comical given the circumstances. He had a good 4 inches or more on me. I can see that. My eyes drifted down to his thigh, then back to him with a raised eyebrow. She stood up, adjusting her clothes before stepping behind him, wrapping her hand around his abdomen, no doubt feeling the six-pack beneath, and tilting her head playfully. I wasn't finished yet, she cooed. Can't I please keep him? His eyes grew wide with something between fear and shock. I chuckled. If he's open to the idea, I'm game, but you'll have to enjoy your leftovers at home. This place is closing. She moved between us and licked her juices from his fingers in a fluid movement while meeting his confused eyes with her sultry gaze. I want you inside me, for real this time. I want your fat cock. He paused, moving his disbelieving stare back and forth between us. I could do... No gay shit, though? Yeah, you kidding me? Placing my hand against her head, I gently encouraged her to both knees, then pressed her mouth against the stain on his leg without ever breaking eye contact. No do shit, no streams. This slut wants to make a sandwich tonight. You and I are the bread. Chapter 3. Him. He'd taken a cab, which made things easier. I let them fool around in the back seat, already drenched with the pouring rain. When I pulled into our driveway, his pants were half off and her lips swirled around his dick while her fingers massaged his balls. Try not to come too quickly. I expect to get my money's worth from those drinks. She is to be satisfied completely before you leave. Something sinister flashed in his eyes. Anger or astonishment, I wasn't really sure, but his fat throbbing cock in my mouth let me know he was no less excited than before. My pussy tingled at the thought of competition between the two, desperately dripping with a need to be used and abused by both. The door behind me opened and Master yanked me off the other man's cock and out the door by my hair. Now we'd really get to play. Wipe your lips, you fucking slut, he growled at me, voice deep and low, threaded with the slightest hint of playfulness that only he and I knew. After years of making love to only one another, we understood the same sexual language, unspoken and conveyed through simple movements or words. Things like taking our glasses of wind kissing as a signal that we wanted to fuck. If I shifted my hips to the side during doggy style, then he knew he was going too deep. A tap on the arm or leg to let him know that I was asking permission to change positions. Cues shared between just the two of us after so much time spent wrapped in the sheets or outside or hidden away out in public. But it was different with others. They didn't speak the same language and didn't know our cues. It added to the excitement and mystery entrenched in experiencing an unknown person and their body. We typically hunted for new prey at Azul, considering they were the premier adult club in Nashville, requiring members to provide proof of clean tests and mostly clean criminal records on a routine basis. Master hauled me inside the home we'd carefully curated as our own for over a decade, leaving the door open for Sir Lumberjack to follow us in. Heat rose in my cheeks as I realized I didn't even know our sexy new guest's name. God, I sure was turning into a whore. Strip filth, Master told me. Immediately I obeyed, catching the gaze of our meaty newcomer as I removed the little black shirt I had chosen for the evening, slowly trailing the zipper in the front down until my nipples hardened as they touched the cool air. I like to keep it cold in our home, something about the way it made my skin feel and heightened every sensation as my husband and others caressed my body. The Hesbanian, the Shash Cadet, he walked towards me, bending low to suck on my nipples, kissing and caressing with a gentleness I hadn't expected out of such a wild-looking man. I had a thing for that primal look, though. The long hair, thick and bushy beards, a little bit of hair everywhere, except down there. I'd fuck Sasquatch himself if he walked through the door and wanted my cunt while I was horny. Take a seat, friend, my husband said, gesturing for our lumberjack guest to make his way to the black leather couch we'd fucked on 1,000,000 times. I'll make you another drink, if you'd like. The mischief on my master's face excited me that much more. He enjoyed it when I whored for him, which made it even better for me. To love, to serve, to drain his cock dry whenever and wherever he so chose. Him. He nodded, looking around, but mostly at my naked slut wife. Something sweet, if you have it. I couldn't decide if he couldn't hold hard liquor or just preferred the more prissy things in life. Either way, the stark contrast between his appearance and drink order were slightly comical. As you wish. I dipped my head, then turned to wifey. Keep our guest entertained. His cock doesn't taste your cunt or ass until I'm back. Am I understood? She knelt, kissing my feet. Yes, master. Thank you, sir. I turned to the kitchen, but not before noticing the eagerness in which she climbed on top of him. Smiling, I found a wide glass made for margaritas and filled it nearly to the brim with her peach moscato. Before returning, I absently opened the fridge and considered what late-night snack we'd have after dining on my slave. Plenty of options, but that wasn't really what I wanted. Instead, I turned on the stove and added 3 coals in a neat triangle. Next, I cleaned the hookah bowl and added shisha. Blueberry mint was always a crowd pleaser and our general favorite. The dual moans from the living room was enough to keep me hard, but I stroked myself anyway while adding ice to the water for a smoother experience. Almost as an afterthought, I dipped into the special supplies cabinet and pulled out a small tin that smelled earthy and sticky. I added a pinch of weed to the bowl and mixed it in. It would only just be noticeable in flavor, but the slight mental alteration would make the evening especially fun. 10 minutes went by until the coals burned red hot. I added them to the top of the little vase-like hookah and puffed until the smoke was thick, cloudy, and sweet. When I entered the living room, his naked body was on the floor with her cunt on his face. She was grinding and playing with his balls while sucking him. I set the hookah on the floor, just within arm's reach, and let my own clothes fall to the floor. Without a word, I knelt behind her and shoved my cock inside. She gasped, and I shoved her head down hard to gag her on his dick. Then I took a puff from the hose. Its effects were slow rolling, but nice and soon I had a lovely little buzz going. I slapped her ass hard enough to leave a welt in the shape of my hand and redoubled my thrusting. Every fucking thrust made my pussy gush and send more droplets down onto the unnamed lumberjack's face. He licked with an eagerness I hadn't expected, mouth open wide with his tongue pushed out to catch the juices from our fucking over his face. For a man who had acted like he'd never been with a couple before, he sure was taking this into stride. Reckon move forward and slide that slutty cunt onto his dick, love, Master whispered into my ear. I moaned before letting my spit dribble down onto his cock. Not that my throbbing, slick puss needed it. I gently lowered myself onto his cock until I'd taken in as much of it as I could handle. I'd always prided myself on having a tight little puss, but in times like these, the slightest bit of fear crept up my spine. If hubby drove this foray where I assumed he would go, my lady bits were in for a rough time. Ride him, bitch. My living, breathing sex toy grunted underneath me as I swayed my hips and bounced on his cock. Master stood before me, clutching tightly at the hair at the nape of my neck, driving my mouth back and forth on his cock while I rode our guest. I moved in the ways I knew Master liked, again communicating with him in our unspoken language as he watched me work. Holds her own dad. Oh damn, he must have fully lost himself in domination if he was commanding the lumberjack now. Our guest hands lifted away from where he clutched both sides of my ass, hovering above my skin for only a moment, as if considering whether he would follow the instructions or not. Now, another command. I was suddenly shoved up, nearly choking on Master's cock as I was thrown forward on it. He sat up, rising to his feet as Master and I held each other with the slightest bit of surprise. "Y'all are into restraints, hun," he grunted, raising both eyebrows. "I'll do you one better than holding her arms." Our nameless lumberjack crossed the room and picked up one of my cozy blankets from the couch. Crazy. What the fuck? He'd just torn a huge strip from my blanket. "Dude, what the hell? That's my—" "Quiet, bitch," he spat. I turned towards Master, a bit surprised and maybe even a little concerned with the direction this session was taking. He probably shouldn't have started commanding so early without knowing whether or not our guest was a dom or switch, since he clearly wasn't submissive, like me. Master smirked, clearly intrigued, and if I had to guess, also a little bit amused. Well, fuck me running, I was to be a sandwich indeed. Him. Silly little thing, concerned with a torn blanket, when her cunt would bear so much worse in only a few short minutes. While he worked on binding her arms, I tore another long strip from the blanket. It was harder for me, but I managed. When he'd finished with her wrists, lashing them behind her back, I forced my cock down her throat while weaving a modified noose around her neck. Our guest took the liberty of leaving his own handprint on her other ass cheek. His face still glistened from our juices, beard twinkling as though it held dozens of diamonds. When the leash was tight enough for her to know it was there without restricting too much airflow, I tied the other end to the strip about her wrists. Now each time she struggled, it would tighten. The more she fought, the less she'd be able to breathe. I left an emergency line in case it needed to be undone in a hurry. Without a word, he saddled up behind her and stuffed himself in her. Her eyes rolled back and she moaned. I slapped her across the face, not hard, but enough to set the tone. Pinching her nipples and pulling her tits taut, I watched as fucked my wife. Each bounce of her ample chest pulled her nipples and I twisted with a savage grin. She cried out, pulling her head toward me, which in turn cinched the noose. I shoved 3 fingers down her throat, watching her eyes water and drool dribble down her chin. I pulled my fingers out, wiping her saliva all over her face before adding my own. It landed on her cheek and slid to her lip. She licked it away without even thinking. She was turning a lovely shade of crimson, almost matching her hair. Jerking her head back and loosening the leash enough to give her a few breaths, I met the bear's eyes. Grab her thighs and lift her up. If she wants to be a double-stuffed cream-filled cookie, she'll get exactly what she asked for, I ordered. While he did, I took the chance to puff the hookah. No need to let it burn. After a long, deep drag, I moved the coals aside and held it in my lungs. His meaty hands left their death grip on her ass and moved to her legs. Gripping firmly, he lifted her into the air, feet above my shoulders, but never slowed the savage hammering of her cunt. I stared into her misty eyes and smirked before blowing the smoke down her throat. First time for everything, my slut. Holding my cock in one hand and her throat in the other so that the smoke had nowhere to go. I pushed against his member with my own. He balked, slowing, but I shoved her shoulders so that he couldn't pull away. Her pussy was tight, but with all the vigorous work our friend was doing and the ample gush of natural lubricant, I was able to push inside beside him, inch by agonizing inch. For a moment, I wondered if she'd tear and bleed and cry and quit. She didn't. Soon we were both balls deep inside her. I timed my thrusts so that each time he retracted, I filled her up again, and vice versa. I only just noticed she was again purple, mouth open with little wheezes for breath escaping. Pleading eyes found my stern ones, and I shook my head. No, not yet. A tiny moan, more like a whimper, escaped her whore mouth. I let her strangle in the middle, but licked my fingers, swirling them against her swollen, abused clit. Finally, I pulled the emergency line, and a wash of hookah smoke spilled from her lips. She choked and shuddered, gasping for air, but bringing mostly smoke back in. Coughing with a hitching struggle, her color slowly moved back to the ruddy pink of sex. With a final savage thrust, I pulled out and pushed her head down. She remained suspended from his powerful arms even as I pressed my balls to her lips. Between taking breaths and slurping her cunt juice from me, she whispered, "Fuck. Oh, fuck." Dark mascara ran down her cheeks, mixed with sweat. I forced her head back and pushed my cock inside her velvety lips until my sack rested against her chin. She gagged, but I grabbed her head, shoving it hard against my stomach. With her arms tied, there was no escape. Knowing she was about to gag, I pulled back and slapped her across the face with my cock. He moaned, grunting like a wild beast. "Don't you dare fucking come." The voice I used was beyond stern, almost angry, and had the desired effect on the man I'd invited into my whore's holes. In his momentary shock, his grip loosened ever so slightly, and I pulled my wife, little more than a living fleshlight at this point, off his dick and let her tumble to the ground. She quivered, unable to do anything more than roll onto her side. I pushed her over so that her weight was against her bound, likely numb at this point, arms. Then I squatted over her so that my asshole was against her lips. The fact that she immediately fell into licking was testament to both the training I'd provided and her devotion to me. I met Lumberjack's astonished gaze, grinned, and raised an eyebrow. "I thought she wanted to be cream-filled," he asked through a wicked grin. I winked. "Don't worry, she will be. You'll get yours and I'll get mine." I grabbed her throat with both hands, pulling back only long enough to force myself down her throat. And she'll get hers, whether she likes it or not. Chapter 4. Her. The cool morning breeze kissed the bruises and tenderness of my skin. I loved sitting out here, on the porch, staring at the small, rolling hills that reminded me of the gigantic mountains back home. My caramel apple cider was still just a bit too hot to drink, but the warmth of my mug spread through my fingers like wildfire, desperately needed since it was probably far too chilly to be sitting outside with wet hair. But I didn't care. This was my favorite thing to do after a night like last night. Sit with my thoughts, all wrapped up in my fuzzy oversized sweater that I loved, curled up with my velvety blanket and my iPad for drawing. We were going to have to get some new chairs, though, because my sore, weak muscles from last night's activities didn't make for very comfortable sitting in this hard wooden Adirondack chair. The back door creaked open, and with it came a wisp of cedar mixed with leather and sawdust, only overpowered by a much stronger smell of black coffee. I'd only come to recognize this scent in the last 12 hours. Sterling. As they'd cleaned their cum off of me last night, I asked him what his name was. Considering he'd been allowed in Azul, I had to assume there was some sort of legitimacy attached to him, so I took him for his word. I'm assuming he slept in the chair in the corner of our bedroom because that's where he was as I succumbed to the heaviest eyelids I might have ever had, acutely aware that he was watching us go to sleep. He was still there, in the same chair, when I woke up to shower this morning. I tried not to let it bother me. I mean, he didn't know his way around our house, and we were all dead tired last night after our fun. But that doesn't mean I wasn't surprised to see him there. Master's little horse that he picked out last time had called an Uber to take them home long before we woke up. Did it make me a bitch to assume that Sterling would have done the same thing? Are morning afters the way people handled one-night stands these days anyway? I couldn't be sure since 13 years had passed since we had been in the game. I smiled, ever so slightly and only to myself, thanking the universe again that I wasn't out in that cage match called dating, dodging Tinder profiles or Beehive or Grindr or whatever the fuck they even use these days, since my old millennial ass had no idea. "Did you sleep well, darlin'?" he asked, settling in the Adirondack next to me like he fucking lived here. Slept just fine," I mumbled. I'm not entirely sure why his presence suddenly offended me so, but here in the morning, out on my peaceful spot with my cider, sort of felt like an invasion of privacy. This was our home, our sanctuary. Having another man here outside of nighttime fun seemed so intimate. I know, it was an ironic and silly thought considering I'd literally licked the man's asshole the night before without even knowing his name, but one can't be blamed when they're having a bit of a sexual revival with their spouse by opening up their marriage. I guess I just have to make the best of it. "Do you think you'll need a ride into town or do you plan to call an Uber?" I asked, realizing how that sounded like every fucking prick antagonist from early 2000s rom-coms, the hit it and quit it type that I used to despise. Get it together, girl. I mean, I make French toast and scrambled eggs like Gordon Ramsay if you'd like. Just wanted to get an idea of the timing is all. Wow, that was the best I could come up with to cover my tracks. He eyed me for a little while as he sipped on his coffee, probably regretting ever agreeing to come home with us last night. He leaned back in his chair, the chair hubby usually sat in beside me when he woke up early against his will, and closed his eyes to smile. It's so nice out here. No honking cars or stupid flocks of bachelorette gangs getting in the way. I think I might have to take you up on that French toast if you don't mind, he laughed. But I'd like to be the one to cook it for you, as I guess as thank you for last night. Well, breakfast for the booty call. I suppose I should take that as a good sign even if my hackles were raised just a tiny bit. We weren't in this to pick up a brother husband or anything like that. It was just supposed to be a good time, and then a good... He winked, rose from the chair and leaned down to kiss me on top of my head. Oh, no. I froze when I knew I should have dodged out of the way. No catching feelings over here. We were happy, satisfied, perfectly perfect with each other, and no complications. That act of kindness settled it for sure. After breakfast, Sterling would have to go. Him. The last time another man had made me breakfast, it was my dad. He was a great cook, but this guy knew what was good. He refreshed my coffee and her cider twice while working furiously in our kitchen. Strangely, he never needed to ask where anything was, as though he'd cased the place while we slept, but that would be crazy. He began plating, bringing a stack of fat, cloud-like pancakes, piles of sausage links, eggs, both scrambled and fried, as well as French toast, and even some charred cherry tomatoes still on the vine. Far more than any sane person would make for 3. Ah, hell, forgot the syrup, he chuckled. With his back turned, I stared intentionally at my wife. She met my gaze and raised an eyebrow. She noticed the same red flags. Something was wrong with this picture, but I couldn't tell what. I shrugged. Maybe we were being overly cautious. Though none of our past adventures ended with a breakfast buffet, it was disconcerting in an oddly sweet way. When we agreed to this shared open situation, rule 1 was to never catch feelings. That included our partners. If any of them got too close, we'd ghost them immediately. But how do you do that when he's standing in your kitchen? He dropped the Mrs. Buttersworth in the center of the table and plopped down in his chair. We only had 2 in the kitchen, but he dragged the one from the bedroom in for his own ass. "Shall we pray?" he asked, looking at each of us in turn. Wifey balked, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes. "We aren't exactly religious, Sterling. I wouldn't know where to begin. It's been nearly 2 decades since I've opened a Bible," I said pointedly, sipping my coffee. "This is tasty, though. Hazelnut?" He shrugged, then let out a long sigh. "No biggie. I got you covered. It's good to have Jesus looking out for you, even if you aren't looking for him." A goddamn evangelist, I caught my eyes at Wifey, blaming her taste for this blessing we were about to unwillingly receive. If he ended up being a clingy bastard, I'd call the police. "Dear Lord Almighty God above, send down your blessings on this food. Let it nourish our bodies and our bodies to your service. Thank you for bold experiences with new friends. Each act of exaltation is in honor of you. I thank you again for the exaltation of last evening, O Lord. May our bodies remain a temple for your use and our pleasure, and in that pleasure we taste the heavenly home we hope one day to share with you. In honor of Christ, the Holy Ghost, and your holiest of names, we thank you for all you provide. Amen." He looked up to see both of us stunned and staring. "Dig in!" He grinned, piling his plate high. It took a moment for us to join him. In my defense, I'd never heard an evening of raunchy, filthy, entirely unwholesome fucking dedicated as an honor to the Lord before. She met my eyes again, and I shook my head slightly. I didn't know where to begin, if I even could have said something. "Tuck in, y'all, it'll get cold," he offered before munching a sausage. I did, and Wifey followed. The food was spectacular. By the end of it, I was stuffed and lethargic. I'd intended on making a hookah, as was our usual routine, but my arms felt slow and fat, like lead weights had been tied to them. The Wifey yawned, and I suddenly realized that I yearned for the warm embrace of our fuzzy blankets for just a couple more hours. I could hardly keep my eyes open. Feasting like this always did the trick. Slowly I stood and stretched, but even that was an effort. "Think I'm gonna lay back down for a bit." I had to stifle a yawn. She stood, almost knocking over her chair, For as sexy and handy as she was, my wife was a bit of a klutz in daily life. Me too, it feels like after Thanksgiving, she yawned, rubbing her eyes. Sterling chuckled again. Well, thanks was given appropriately, but I understand. Y'all hit the hay, but don't get back to the fun without giving me a holler. Together, holding one another for support, we staggered the arduous 2 rooms and a hallway to our bed. I closed the door and, though I'd never done it before, locked it. She fell into it and I rolled in beside her. "Hey babe," I whispered. "Ready for round 2? She laughed, trying to push me away, but failing. "Fuck you, my love." Chuckling, I managed to get my hand up under her nightie, applying the boob hold, before the world dimmed into a gray void. Sleep came easy, but my dreams were filled with vivid images of running, something chasing with an overwhelming feeling of what could only be described as danger. As I woke, I realized my arms and legs were spread out, not like I typically slept at all. Usually I burrowed under a mountain of blankets with pillows over and between my legs, resting on my side, and curled into a comforting ball. Also, usually when I woke up, even without my glasses, at least I could fucking see. I knew within an instant what the tight feeling covering my entire head, shielding my eyes, my nose, with only a circular opening for me to breathe out of. We'd only bought it a few weeks ago, right at the cusp of our sexual revival, but I'd ordered the mask online and hated it when I tried it on. And he said, my heart beat within my chest, the familiar parasite of anxiety, which was almost always stifled by my medication, bursting through as a grandiose showstopper, announcing their damn presence to ruin my day. I tried to curl up and comfort myself, but something rough held my wrists and ankles. Oh, fuck. I tugged and pulled and tried to break free, but I'd been in this position before and knew exactly what held me, the purple ropes we keep in our sex toy trunk. Hubby must have tied me up while we napped, but he knew my claustrophobic ass didn't care for this mask, so why the hell would he put me in it was beyond me. And while I was sleeping, "Babe," I called, slowing my breathing to try and settle my racing heartbeat and the knot in my stomach that was slowly cinching tighter. "Babe, are we playing? What the fuck, honey?" Hubby didn't answer me, and every sore, weak muscle in my body had apparently turned to stone while I slept. Everything felt heavier than it should have. Phew, this was weird. "Ivy, answer me." Sliding across my skin, I felt the peacock feather we used for sensory play. Along each arm, across my midriff, down my legs, he trailed it, finishing with a playful tickle on my toes. The tickler leaned down, kissing me on the forward as he gave my boob a quick squeeze. Ah! There it was. Instant comfort and relief flooded my body as I realized it was just my hubs, ramping up for playtime again. He was using our special language again to let me know it was him without having to say a word. Thank God. Oh hell, surely Sterling hadn't stuck around for our nap time? I couldn't imagine that Master would want to play again so soon with him, too, so he must have already left. A click followed by a loud, familiar buzzing sound filled my ears. Ah, the Hitachi. Master and I loved to play with Classic Wand because it never ever failed to get me off, which painted this unseen session much clearer for me. He wanted to control my orgasms. I stretched my legs out, curling my toes in anticipation of what I knew was coming. He'd lightly trail the vibrator up each leg, across my skin, teasing me until my little puss dripped for him and I begged for more. But no, I pulled against the ropes and strained to try and close my legs around the wand as he had turned it straight to the second setting, full strength, and held it straight to my clit without any warning at all. It was too much, too fast, too strong. "Babe, slow down. I'm still so sensitive from last night." Another click and the buzzing noise softened, and I knew he'd turned it down to the first and my favorite, lighter setting, which prolonged the play. He ran one finger from my ankle to my inner thigh, pressing the wand along the outer edges of my most sensitive areas. He was expertly teasing me now, going much slower and more gentle, exactly as I liked it. Being restrained held its own excitement for activities, but even more so with the mask on. I so wished there was at least a hole for my nose so that I could breathe better, but I would just have to enjoy this experience as it happened and talk with him about it later. His coarse, bearded face plunged into my pussy, licking my lady lips with a flat, wide tongue before swirling the tip of his tongue on my clit. Over and over he flicked as my legs twitched, and I tightened my ass and moaned for him. "Fuck yeah, baby, lick your kitten's pussy." He shoved the vibrator down on my asshole, sliding 2 fingers inside to penetrate me while he licked. Phew, this wouldn't take long. I moaned and whimpered for him as pain mixed with pleasure, and I knew release was soon to come. "Permission to come, master." But he didn't say anything. "Babies, give it to me." I could hardly choke out the words around my screams of delight. "Let me come, baby." In the throes of ecstasy, the height of the passionate release he had just given me, I froze in the restraints, still shaking and screaming as I climaxed. But my screams weren't for pleasure this time. Now, I knew at the moment he spoke, but as he ripped away, my nose confirmed my greatest fear. Cedar, leather, and sawdust. Him. Over the years, I'd learned to know my wife's screams. The moaning scream of orgasm, the excited scream of surprise, the coarse scream of anger or frustration, and the scream of excitement after achieving some new breakthrough. The scream that woke me was her terror scream. It was generally reserved for when my pranks got a little out of hand, like hiding behind the bathroom curtain or when she woke in the middle of the night, searching for a glass of water but instead finding me standing in the kitchen. I leapt to my feet, or rather tried to. Instead, my ankles and wrists caught and I fell over with the weight of a chair on my back. The world was full of darkness in every direction. From our past play, I knew what this was. I was bound to a chair with a gag in my mouth and blindfold over my eyes. He was still screaming, but beneath, I heard his chuckle. "Sterling?" I struggled against the bonds, but he'd practiced his handiwork. The more I moved, the tighter they became. There was a weightless sensation as I was lifted from the floor, chair suddenly righted. Then, the blindfold peeled back. Squinting against the unexpected light, Sterling's face came into focus. He had a wicked grin on his suddenly punchable face and he was naked. Thought I'd take y'all's little game up a notch. Hope you don't mind I helped myself to your little toy chest. Lots of neat stuff in there. He picked up a silvery butt plug with a bunny tail which wifey had only ever used once, before banning it from the bedroom. The string of curses intended for him came out as a garbled mess against the gag. He just chuckled. "Don't worry about it, she done got off once. The good book says an eye for an eye, so in this case, I figure that means an orgasm for an orgasm. If last night told me anything, it's that you like to watch. Wanted to wait till you woke up for the rough stuff?" He turned to my wife, bound and blindfolded. "I know you take it rough and all. I got you covered, little lady." I howled with fury, tugging at the ropes until my wrists and ankles were raw, but his knots held firm. She fought valiantly, but as he crawled on top of her, kissing her nipples and rubbing his cock against her clit, it was obvious that she was helpless. "Y'all are gonna love this. I popped a couple boner pills, so we gonna make this last and last." His ass arched back, then rammed home in her pussy. She screamed and squirmed, but he had his way with her, slapping her tits, choking her, hammering her with his engorged cock. In my struggle, I again knocked over the chair. He looked back and grinned. I knew he saw the murderous hate in my eyes. While he stared, he picked up the butt plug, popping it into his mouth. Like one of them Playboy bunnies in the magazines. Then, he shoved it into her ass and she screamed again, this time from pain. He shrugged and thrust himself inside again. I was forced to watch a stranger I'd met only a day before rape my wife, and there was nothing I could do about it. As promised, it lasted for hours. My ankles and wrists bled from the exertion until I was beyond exhausted. Even my wife had stopped screaming and now only sobbed. He'd used every toy in our regrettably impressive arsenal. Her poor ass must be in terrible agony, her pussy must feel broken. The candle wax he'd dripped across her body mingled with droplets of blood. He'd found the whip and flogged her until her voice cracked. One of her nipples had torn when he'd ripped away the clamps, yet still he fucked her like a machine. His pounding reached a fevered pitch and my eyes teared at what was about to happen. "Oh, fuck. Oh, God, thank you. Oh, thank you, Lord." he shouted, emptying his cock inside her before switching back to her ass and stealing the last of her screams of agony. A piece of me died for her, and from another world came the hope that she wouldn't blame herself for this. Tears streamed down my face as he moaned and his thrust slowed. "God damn, that's good." He slapped her abused pussy and stepped away. "You got you one bad girl here, bud." I found renewed strength and tried to get at him. He looked down with mock pity. Then the world exploded into stars as his foot collided with my head, feeling more like a fucking hoof. My skull bounced off the wall with blinding pain and all went black. If I had been trampled by 1,000 stampeding beasts, my body would feel less broken than it did right now. He hadn't actually broken any bones that I knew of, but my spirit and will were the lowest they'd been in a long, long time. Laying there as he violated me again and again as I lay tied to mine and hubby's bed was a feeling no shower nor any amount of drugs could ever wash away. Consent was essential, and this motherfucker had crossed every line imaginable with no mercy in sight. I wouldn't consider myself an angry or vengeful person, but in this moment, with blood mixed with sweat mixed with his disgusting musk of cedar and bullshit, I knew that as soon as I could, I would kill him. When my strength had subsided and I thought he might lose interest if I no longer fought, the thoughts that kept me conscious were some of the most vile, incomprehensible acts that I intended to carry out upon this shit stain of a human. I whimpered as he kicked my beloved again, this time in the stomach since he'd knocked his chair over to the side. The hard thud of hubby's head smacking the ground made me sick to my stomach, yet another agonizing sensation added to the mountain of misery I was currently crushed under. Outside the window, I could see the full moon rising and my heart sank even further. Any other night, I'd be cleansing and charging my crystals, setting out moon water, and banishing internal feelings that no longer served me. I wished I could banish this motherfucker back to whatever slimy pit he crawled out from. Perhaps I'd burn Azul to the ground too, since their vetting was clearly a fucking ruse. Shitbag Sterling sauntered over with his limp cock, waving it in front of my face. "Smell your pussy juice on my cock, little lady." I turned my face away, the one area of my body he had chosen not to defile. "Fuck you, you fucking monster!" I screamed. He threw his disgusting head back and roared with laughter. "Oh, but darlin', you just did, over and over and over again." He sat on the bed and I seethed as he rubbed along my leg, tracing the lines where he had drawn blood or left welts on my skin. "Just like you asked," he breathed. The shock of his words jolted through my body as if I'd been electrocuted, which, honestly, would probably have been a preferable circumstance to this one if I could have chosen at this moment. "Ask?" I croaked, voice still hoarse from screaming today. It hurt so badly, but I couldn't let that one go. He moved to the foot of the bed, sliding his fingers inside my cunt one more time, this time pulling out a long stream of creamy, sticky substance that I knew to be his cum. The thought of any part of him still inside of me seared the edges of my soul. Hubby started moaning from the ground where he still sat sideways tied to the chair. "Don't you dare fucking speak," Sterling whispered, twisting my husband's own words from before as if he played some sick game and toying with us. He turned back to me, smiling in a way that, truly, let me see him for the very first time. Unapologetically evil. Now what was I saying? Ah, yes, how you asked for it. "You begged for my cock last night, didn't you, darlin'? Don't you remember?" He stood at the foot of the bed, bending over and placing both hands on it, sticking out his ass. In a mocking voice, he cried, "Take me, fuckboy, rape my fucking pussy." Rarely was I rendered speechless, but in this moment, plagued with injuries and the ever-phantom feeling of his skin against mine, I couldn't utter a single word. "Use my cunt like you mean it, fucker." He mocked me again, the high-pitched tone a crude imitation of my voice in the throes of passion. "It wasn't giving you permission to actually rape me, you fucking asshole." He chuckled again, moving to the four corners of our four-poster bed as he untied my restraints. "But it was, little lady, and you never said our safe word." We hadn't even discussed a safe word, because we hadn't agreed to full BDSM with each other, you bastard. I laid very still as he untied me, thinking and plotting and planning about how I would handle this glimpse at freedom from Sterling. I could run, but then I'd be leaving hubby behind, and I have a feeling that it wouldn't end well if I did that. Sterling was strong, a tree trunk of muscle and sinew bulging beneath his skin. He would no doubt catch me if I tried. I could try to find one of our phones and call the police, but that would still require escaping from this room, and my searching would draw attention. No, that wouldn't work either. I had to find a way to deceive him, to draw him into my own clutches, on my terms, in a way that I could manage in my feeble physical state. "How about a shower, darlin'?" he asked, suddenly switching to that sickly sweet persona that I'd met last night with the fruity drink and fears of offending my husband. This fucker was dangerous. Leaving one foot and one wrist still restrained, he walked through the French doors to our bathroom and turned the shower head on. As he walked back in, he crossed through glistening white beams of moonlight coming through the window. But the moment he stepped into the light, he lurched, doubling over and clutching his stomach and crying out in pain, much to my delight. "Oh, thee darlin'," he wheezed, "you and your beau are in for a real treat tonight." As he stood bathed in the moonlight, Sterling released an agonizing scream, a guttural sound from deep in his stomach that, to my horror, slowly turned into bleat. His nose and mouth elongated in a snout, with huge thick horns sprouting and twisting and growing from his skull. He quickly untied my wrist and clopped back over into the moonlight's beam, where I could see that his bare feet were in fact hooves. A thin layer of wool coated his chest, his legs, everywhere but his member, which managed to stand erect yet again. "Bleat? Yeah." I scrambled to try and untie my ankle, determined to rouse hubby and get the gun, find a lamp, find anything in this house that could kill this abomination on the spot, but to no avail. Sterling continued to transform and, to my greater horror, grow, until he stood in front of me, all of at least 8 feet tall as a half-human/half-ram man. I released the breath I'd apparently been holding, sure from the swimming dizziness in my head that I would soon pass out. Chapter 5. I roused slowly, feeling like I'd spent hours on a boat, fighting the ever-crashing ocean waves. The room spun and everything sounded like it was underwater. I heard gagging, the gluck-gluck-gluck of someone taking a cock too large for their throat. Turning my head was painful, but what I saw had the simultaneous effect of sobering me and making me question if I was trapped in some terrible nightmare from the works of Poe. My wife, with an ankle still tied to the bed, was being savagely face-fucked by a monster, half man, half lamb, and all raging cock. Raising my hand in a feeble attempt to stop what I knew was inevitable, I found it slipped free of the bloody rope. When he'd kicked me, he'd broken the chair. I silently thanked my wife for her taste in old, eclectic wooden furniture. My stomach burned, threatening to cramp, but I knew if that thing had his way with her, it might legitimately kill her. His dick was at least 2 feet long and currently sliding in and out of her esophagus while he forced her mouth open with both hands. Wiggling the wood gave me hope. The fractured furniture gave way with effort, and soon I was untying my own foot, desperately trying to think. What do you do when a goddamn monster is fucking your wife to death? The guns. I kept a pistol in the nightstand. The loaded Glock would do the trick, but he'd see me going for it. There was a shotgun in the closet, a double-barreled 12-gauge from Savage Arms. One barrel held birdshot as a warning. The second housed a lead slug, a last-ditch effort to end a threat if the birdshot wasn't deterrent enough. But could I reach it in time? Would he see me out of the corner of his eye? Could I even stand? I had to do something. As quickly as I could, I crawled for the closet, over the toys that smelled like her, some slightly bloody, others still glistening. The sight of them enraged me, the breach of consent, the violent brutality and disrespect. I would put the slug into his forehead before the end of it. Sterling fucking sheephead. Her hoarse shriek took my mind from the task at hand, and I turned in time to see him clawing at her, trying to turn her over so he could mount her again. I knew if he got what he wanted, she'd tear internally. Bleeding from the inside was something that killed people. Her life might legitimately be in my hands. Fuck caution, I had to act. I stood and the room spun, but I snatched the closet door to steady myself. The whole time I heard her pleading, begging him. It sickened me, even as my abdomen seized. When I reached for the top shelf, it felt like my guts were ripping open, but I felt the cool wooden stock and drug it down. Putting my back to the wall to steady my aim, so that I couldn't see her body at all, I pulled the trigger. I meant for it to be the slug, but years without use caused me to forget which barrel was which. Instead, a spray of tiny lead fragments exploded just as his furry ass arched back, ready to slam into her. Crimson holes riddled his body. The force and shock of it sent his thrust off course and he fell from the bed. "Get the Glock," I screamed. The words vibrated in my own head, threatening to split my skull from temple to temple. I nearly dropped the shotgun. Sterling was up and moving before I knew it, lowering his head with both curly horns aimed at me. I pulled the trigger a half-second too late. Instead of his brains splatting the walls, my shot ripped through his chest, shattering his shoulder. But his momentum caught me, plowing me into the wall. If I thought my head hurt before, this new pain broke the record a dozen times over. I retched and vomited, which in itself sent forking blooms of red anguish crackling through my mind. My vision swam. Sterling drew himself up on one knee and snarled at me. Alien eyes, rectangular horizontal slits, glowered down at me. Through all of this, he maintained his club-like erection. "Don't want me to play with your contour anymore? Then I'll have you instead," he grinned. Even with only one functional shoulder and pockmarked with searing lead across his back. His supernatural strength overpowered me in my state of weakness, and he wrenched me onto my knees. He ripped through the thin fabric of my pajama pants, and I knew it was over. He bleated like a demon. Baphomet's cock would be up my ass in a few short moments, and when he was done, he'd beat me to death with it. I could see it unfold in my mind, but worst of all, I was powerless to stop it. In the most desperate situation of my life, I couldn't even fight back. An explosion sent my ears ringing and my head pounding all over again. The creature behind me howled, and I heard it through a sharp, endless ringing. It released my hips and hobbled away, shattering the glass door and limping into the night with incredible speed and agility for someone so mangled. Then my wife was there, cradling my head and kissing my face. It was everything I could do to keep my consciousness. When she saw I was alive, she snapped up the gun and fired 3 more times into the night. "Fuck you, Sterling. I'll kill your hairy ass if I ever see you again." 2 more shots. Then she returned to me, dragging me into the bathroom and fumbling through the first aid kit. She cleaned and bandaged my wrists and ankles before popping 4 Tylenol in my mouth and making me swallow. I tried to tell her how sorry I was for what she'd been through, how she shouldn't be helping me when her body had been ravaged for hours, how it would be okay now, and pull her into a tight hug and never let go, how proud of her I was for saving us both and remembering the pistol, how special she was and how much I loved her. Instead, I retched again, spilling bile mixed with blood across the bathroom tile she'd installed herself. She'd been so proud of it. The last thing I saw was 4 white Tylenol tablets among what had remained of my stomach contents as my head lowered to the cold floor. The shower had been running the whole time. He was still warm. My rock, my soulmate, my bearded best friend who came into my life at the perfect moment and now had left it at the worst. The cold night air wrapped around me, stretching fetid claws around my heart to aid my grief and shock as they stole any last warmth my soul possessed. There would be no happy ending to this tale. Whatever the fuck that piece of shit Sterling had transformed into didn't matter. With rageful certainty, I knew that soon, whether by bullet or brokenness or my own bloody hands, I was going to kill him. Within 24 hours, that bastard had ripped our lives away from us, and now he was going to pay with his own. I turned to Whitney, the first of our neighbors who'd heard my screams of anguish, and after calling and texting and trying her best to get a hold of me, she'd eventually come storming through our front door. If there'd been any bullets left in the Glock, I'd have shot her right there in my surprise, for fear that it was Sterling barging in again. But thankfully, it was only her. "We need to get help," I said. "That monster is back there in the woods and I can't go get him alone." I wasn't even sure if I believed in a god anymore, because there was no fucking way any sane god with good intentions would sit idly back and watch as his children experience what we did tonight. And Sterling had prayed in my house. Bile rose in my throat again. If I did believe in a god and thought maybe his attention was turned elsewhere or who fucking knows what, I had to believe that sending Whitney through our door was the least they could do to help us, because this bitch was unrattled, unfazed, unhinged enough to not even question my explanation that the man we'd brought home from the bar turned out to be a rapist half-ram beast that killed my husband. That's all. I wasn't even surprised by how she took it into stride. We Southerners are fucking crazy. As we stood beside hubby, who we'd laid out on the kitchen table, she narrowed her eyes, then spoke. "Let's get the rest of the neighbors. Trey, Jackson, Adam, those weirdos that have that sign by their mailbox. Hell, I feel like Casey the Queen would be up for a fight if she knew what the fuck we were up against." If I could have mustered up any laughter or joy, which I couldn't, that comment about the Queen would have made me chuckle. Casey the Upper, a middle-aged divorcee whose house sat between our two, with the perfect grass and imperfect attitude, her nose typically hoisted so far in the air I was surprised she could even see to walk up and down the neighborhood to judge the rest of us. I did care who the fuck we got to join us, only that they did, and that they brought as many weapons as they could hold. "Should we call the cops?" I asked, knowing full well if I was back in my hometown I wouldn't hesitate, since they'd seen some weird shit out there. But our single-street subdivision, surrounded by fields and back roads, was on the very outer edges of Nashville, where beasts and skinwalkers and all that Appalachian woo-woo bullshit wasn't as commonly accepted as truth. "Nah," Whitney said. "We'll handle it ourselves." Their reactions varied from hesitation to sympathy, but one by one, the neighbors we expected to, and even a few that surprised me, came back to the house with Whitney. As our makeshift hunting party grew, so too did my confidence. Most held shotguns and hunting rifles, but again, if any emotion other than blind, boiling rage could stir within me, I would have laughed when I saw the little granny from the end of our street show up with fucking candlesticks in each hand. Whatever worked, I suppose. I knew I couldn't bring my husband back, but gutting the fucking animal who took him from me sparked the smallest ember of hope for revenge. Sterling. Fools, I'd forgotten how bad bullets hurt. Fucking bullets, my only weakness. Well, the metal in them, iron specifically. We Fae don't appreciate the stuff, it's our... Of all the things in the world to become common, steel had been the biggest problem. It burns like the Holy Cross against a vampire's skin. Dear God, Almighty Lord above all, knowing Christ above in all your high holy wisdom, deliver this warrior unto your holy hands, O Lord. The first healer, divine doctor, send down your love and touch my wounds. Let the payment on Calvary Hill restore my body and my body to your service. In your holy, holy name, Amen. My wounds always closed with time, but this fucking shoulder needed spiritual levels of help. The arm hung limply at my side, and I sneered at the bitch who'd done it. She asked for it, begged to be ravaged and brutalized. Her worthless husband had been all too keen to join in the sin. God kept leading me to the sinful, and I kept punishing them in the manner they'd chosen before sending them home to Him. Praise Jesus, hallelujah. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want, except to see the bitch's cold, dead eyes staring up at me. That's the Lord's work right there. And I meant to be a good Christian soldier. Fucking whore. After plucking what fragments I could from my poor, aching back, the bleeding holes knitted themselves shut. The shoulder was getting better, but it would be a bit before I could really use it. After the last blast, I'd waited around to see what she was about. Called friends and countrymen in quick order, and soon there was a whole house full of sinners in need of a reckoning. God, we're reaping evil wholesale today. They brought guns, which was bad but nothing I hadn't handled before. Split 'em up and take 'em out. One. By one. Couple dozen, maybe more. I'd proselytized more than that. Biding my time, I watched them assemble. All they needed was torches and it would be a mighty fine witch hunt. They had flashlights instead, which cheapened the whole thing. I missed when the world was young and the sinners dumb and predictable. No matter, the crawling sensation of rapid healing sent a shiver down my spine. My shoulder would regrow and be right as rain in a couple of hours, but by then, half this little posse would be dead or dying. Just like fucking, I like my hunting to last. The whore bitch would be last, and I'd show her the suffering of Rahab. This Jezebel would regret her sins and beg forgiveness for them before I tore out her throat. It wasn't perfect, but the healing thus far would suffice for my needs, at least for a time. The huntsmen lingered a while, talking, planning, but when they came into the woods, I reversed direction, doubling back until I could get behind them. If they could track worth their salt, they'd see my hoof prints. That made it my game to lose. Home field advantage, if you will. I could funnel them into a death trap. Tennessee was full of forests and trees. They were my home long before these humans made the Holy Father cry. Each is guilty of original sin, and if they think praying, believing, or washing the offense away with water would do any damn bit of good, they are fools. The first to slow was a fella who stopped to tie his boot. He was decked out in all the AliExpress, armed patriot equipment his monthly check could pay for. Even his damn boots had mully-webbing. Clearly, he wasn't so bad off as he told Uncle Sam, or he'd be at home, praying over his Bible for blessings. Streaking through the trees, my hand slammed against his throat, silencing and pinning him against an oak. I kicked him hard between the legs and he tried to double over. You should have stayed home and prayed, buddy. You fucked up coming out here. I sighed. Want to get paid for being unable? I'll make an honest man of ya. He tried to speak, but I knocked out half his teeth with a knee and threw him to the ground. I leapt, landing on his femurs with my hooves, shattering them into 1,000 bone splinters. Next came the arms, which dislocated when I tugged them behind his back. Whoever found him would see the beauty of my God-given talent for blood art. In the traditional runes of my demons, I carved the damning word greed into his chest, digging deep enough to puncture his lungs in several places. If he repented, the hand of God may yet reach down to save him, but the Lord probably had more important matters to tend to. Some little girl was probably out there begging him to help her sick dog. The markings would draw demons to drag his soul into the abyss, into a plane of sulphurous, fiery agony forever and ever and ever, flayed and torn apart, eaten and trampled again and again. Stephen King had it right. Hell is repetition. I left the sinner wheezing for breath, bloody bubbles oozing from his chest with each inhalation. Who's next, my God? Which transgressor will you send me next? I pray for guidance and wisdom in your great plan. Chapter 6. Code. A shiver ran down my spine as the shadows of the towering trees danced around us, their branches intertwining like the claws of a beast anticipating its next victim. Like fucking Sterling. Stay close, I muttered. We need to stick together if we're going to have any chance of killing this sick fuck. Guys. Whitney held up the machete she was clearing our path with to signal for us to stop. Where is Landry? I closed my eyes and groaned. Aw. I wouldn't worry about him, Whit, the neighbor from the brown house said. His name escaped me at the moment, and I couldn't even muster up any guilt about it. And Crawley chickened out and ran back to that plump and pleasant little wife of his, fearing for his life or asking her for his balls back or something. He chuckled. Far to the right, a twig snapped, followed by a menacing growl. We turned our flashlights, and one or two spotlights that were definitely used for illegal lamping when the hunting season was shit, or so I'd been told, to try and see what the fuck had done it, but there wasn't any doubt in anyone's minds. Sterling, you piece of shit, you might be a goat or some shit, but come on out and face us like a man. For the first time in hours, the corners of my mouth almost twitched into a smile. That granny from the end of the road with her candlesticks and wild eyes was one crazy woman yelling at the beast with no fear. I was starting to love her. You'll have to kill every last one of us before getting out of these woods, motherfucker, I joined her in the taunts. The words tasted nice on my tongue. Look, he's behind us. Close it, turn around, make a fucking circle, you guys. For the first time, I sensed a bit of fear coming from Whitney, which instantly rattled my own confidence. I mean, I was only standing due to rageful adrenaline and the need for revenge, and I knew as soon as that feeling waned, so too would what little strength I had. We turned our backs toward each other, shining our lights all around to try and catch a glimpse of him, but none confirmed a sighting. We were caught in a twisted game of cat and mouse, and I'd be damned if I continued to be the prey. You can't run from us forever, Sterling. This is government land. They're probably watching us on their hidden cameras and shit headed this way right now. What the fuck do you think they're gonna do when they see you and your goddamned horns? Trey was right. Our community bordered on some top-secret government bullshit, and more than once they'd appear out of nowhere if any one of us stepped into the woods. Where were they when we needed them now? Yeah, get ready for experiments, bitch. Might as well just let us give you an easier way out. If fear hadn't frozen every muscle in my body, I would have rolled my eyes at Whitney's latest words. I whipped around at the scream behind me to find Trey splayed on his back in the center of our circle, a bleeding hoof print imprinted on his crushed face. Fucking hell. Oh my god. Trey. Holy shit. I knelt beside him as faint wisps of air bubbled the blood pouring out of his mouth. I held back the bile rising in my throat, trying my damnedest not to puke on the man as he died. His nose was pushed back into what was now a fragmented skull, with both eyes bulging out on either side. Don't fucking run, you idiots. Whitney stood with her back to me and Trey, guarding and watching for another attack. 3, maybe 4 of our number had bolted into the trees. You fucking cowards, I screamed, not really sure I could blame them, but knowing full well that going off alone in these woods gave Sterling an opportunity to pick them off one by one. They were as good as dead now, which also meant that they'd be caught in the crossfire of what I was about to do to end this shit. I grabbed Trey's semi-automatic like I knew what I was fucking doing, even though I didn't. It couldn't be that hard. Point the shit and pull the trigger. Hope that Sterling was on the receiving end and he would die. In an otherworldly frenzy, I released the flood of rage dammed behind the last of my conscience and let that shit flow free. Poor Bert, I screamed, walking in a circle and sprayed bullets in all directions. May God have mercy on any creature other than fucking Sterling that got in the way, because I was going to fire and reload this gun until every last bullet in Trey's backpack was spent. And even then, once I found fucking Sterling on the ground, I would pepper him with a few more to make sure he resembled Swiss cheese before I quit. Sterling, crazy heathen bitch. She'd mowed down 3 of her own in that violent show of ignorance. They lay in crumpled heaps on a varying scale of dead to dying. I looked down to see moonlight through my shadow. Stumbling, I realized she'd hit me too. The redneck-rigged semi-automatic to automatic boomstick had enough power to take down a fucking bear, but that was more than she needed, and by a lot. The bullets had passed through me, tearing away at my insides as they went. White-hot pain seared, but without the iron allow remaining in my body, the wounds were already closing. She'd have been better off with her husband's shotgun. But she didn't know that. A flashlight swept over me and I growled, limping away. More blazing projectiles tore through me and I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Cunt hit my fucking lungs. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's a punctured lung. My breath came in heaving, tremulous bursts. The whistling sound of a sucking lung wound from several places in my chest. Rolling onto my back, I saw her approach. Beside her was the one she'd called Whitney and a fucking grandma with candlesticks raised like nunchucks. God damn. She leveled the rifle's barrel even with my heart. You broke my trust, raped me, and killed the love of my life, you fucking dick. You're going to regret the day you came home with us, she grinned wickedly. I'm going to enjoy every last fucking hurt you feel. Stand up and go back to whatever god you worship with your tail between your legs. Raising my head in a hitching, aching way, I stared into her round eyes with my goat-like ones. There was no fear in her. If the situation were different, it would be hot as fuck. Thinking of breaking her prideful will was almost enough to resurrect my erection, but my body didn't have enough blood. Slowly, I wobbled to my feet. There wasn't 10 yards between us. Whitney raised her own revolver, pointing it at my face. Do you have any idea how much it hurts to be shot? I snarled, finally able to regain my breath. She smirked. Nope, but it'll be the last thing you ever feel. I leapt, powerful legs closing the distance in a breath, but she was quick on the trigger. Whitney's hit first before I'd even landed. The bullet shattered my left horn, spinning my head for the second to glance off the right. Her gun clicked, the last round spent. But the horror more than made up for it with a burst of 5 rounds that sliced through me, then 5 more. I hit the ground and she dropped the magazine to add another and sent 10 more through me into the ground. Needless to say, my mind blazed with agony and I slumped. She wasn't done though. Fumbling through the backpack, she found another full clip before spilling the remaining contents while filling me with even more holes. I shuddered, then went limp. The women cheered and whooped, hugging one another in celebration. The whore dropped her borrowed rifle to fully embrace the old lady, candlesticks and all, and Whitney walked to my mutilated form and started bashing me with the revolver, cursing and ridiculing me for being what I was. Poking fun at my faith. A person's faith is something with which one should not fuck. Suddenly I hated her gloating mouth. Pride. A deadly sin if ever I'd seen one, and I'd witnessed my fair share over the centuries of my endless crusade. As she brought the weapon down for a 6th time, I reached out and caught it, ripping it from her grasp, then grabbing her wrist. With supernatural agility, I twisted her around as a human shield between us. Again, without residual iron to slow the healing and boosted by my rage, I was quickly becoming whole. The soft tissue damage was already gone and the few shattered ribs were only an inconvenience. This one wore a pleather miniskirt, the sluttiest of public appropriate garments. If you're done fucking around, little lady, I'm ready to get this rapture moving. To explain my intentions, I licked Whitney's face with a bifurcated tongue and as foul a sneer as I could muster. Stick around, there's plenty of lust left for all 3 of ya. The whore scrambled for her rifle, but I threw Whitney into her and took it up myself. The weight of something so generally deadly was shockingly light. Whitney had managed to detangle herself from the wife, but I dragged her back by the ankle, holding her effortlessly in the air and waggling the rifle's long form in her face. In each epoch there are knights, and while the swords take different forms without their weapons, soldiers are mortal like anyone else. I'm going to fuck you with this rifle, so far up your cunt that you'll taste the oil. Then, when I'm done, I'll pull the trigger. Whitney fought against him with everything she had, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The cold, hard ground beneath reminded me of Bert, how he too was cold and probably hardening in rigor mortis right fucking now. This beast had defiled me, murdered my love, and now he was damn near close to doing worse to my dearest friend.
Come on, bitch, I like it when you struggle. For me, he growled, holding a thrashing Whitney out in front of him, dangling her by the ankles as he licked between her skirt with that disgusting forked tongue. Her cunt tastes like fear. In his other wool-covered hand, he shoved the shotgun up against her closed mouth. Wet it for me, bitch. I struggled to my feet again, locking eyes with my terrified friend as she tightly held her lips closed, shaking her head as tears streamed down her cheeks. Sterling popped the barrel against her mouth, hard enough to knock out a few teeth, I realised in horror, as Whitney screamed, blood and teeth dribbling out of her mouth. Sterling shoved the barrel in her mouth, back and forth, sliding far enough back that Whitney gagged. From the side, I noticed our granny neighbour and her candlesticks hiding behind a larger tree. Yes! He hadn't seen her. If I could distract him long enough, she could put the fucking animal down for good. Let her go, you fucking beast, I yelled, hoping, praying that even a moment's distraction could give Granny the opportunity she needed. Your fight is with me, not her. Sterling threw his head back, roaring with a horrific laugh mixed with bleats that made my skin crawl. Pure evil seeped from this demon. You want me to let her go? He taunted. You gonna take her place, little lady? Sterling sneered at me as I watched Granny creepy up behind him, ever closer. I turned my eyes back to him, hoping he didn't notice my shifting eyes. Fuck, I probably messed it up. Yes, take me, do what you'd like, but let her go. He laughed again, opening his long fucking fingers to drop Whitney straight on the ground. Time slowed and everything stilled as she fell in slow motion. I watched in horror as 2 more teeth flew out of her mouth, her eyes growing wide as the top of her head made contact with the ground, cracking her neck to the side in one of the most sickening sounds I'd ever heard. Her body crumpled to the side. Before the echo of my go had silenced in the woods, my best friend's life had been snuffed out in an instant. In the next, Sterling raised a hoof and caught Granny in her candlesticks, now fully running at him to attack, square in her bitty chest, knocking her onto her back on the ground. Granny still. Fuck you! God damn it, I fucking hate you, you piece of shit! I ran towards him, all plans and concern and sense abandoned as I allowed my rage to fuel my movements once more. I'm gonna fucking kill you with my bare hands, I screamed, not knowing or caring how I was actually going to accomplish that, but damn it, I was going to try or die, fighting. When I reached him, Sterling simply held out one wool-covered hand and grasped my hair. The curls my husband had so loved to nuzzle, this beast now hoisted me up by, No, little lady, we're going on a little walk, you and I. You need to see what your anger has done. In the slowest, most agonizing journey I've ever taken through these woods, carried by a fucking goat beast as hoisted me over his shoulder, he took me one by one to see bodies of my fallen neighbours. Neighbours that had died by my hand tonight. My stomach churned each time one came into view, the light from the spotlight Sterling held in his other hand reflection off their staring glassy eyes, mouths open and relaxed with ghostly pale faces. How quickly they had gone cold out after I'd shot them. Fuck, what had I done? Sterling tossed me to the ground, near the centre of the clearing where I had stood and spun to take the shots. He closed his eyes, smiling and raising both arms towards the full moon, much lower in the sky than when we'd first come into these woods tonight. Sterling grinned. Rise, my children. Him. I dropped the whore and held both hands to the sky. Electric, holy energy swirled around me and I could see the souls flying away toward the gates of heaven or descending to the bowels of hell. Why God would want these meth-addicted perverts was beyond me, but he works in mysterious ways. Without souls, their bodies were my puppets. One by one, the hillbilly scum rose, scampering to me for instruction. I was the shepherd and they were my flock. I felt like Moses, God rest his soul, returning from the mountain to lead his army against the sinners of Midian that worshipped false idols. Grinning, I turned to the whore, but she was gone. She hadn't even stayed to watch the culmination of my great power. A couple of zombies was all it took to make her run for the hills, but it was her house she'd be headed toward. Cowards always return to the places that once made them feel safe. Yet there was no safety for this Jezebel, only suffering and pain. I mentally commanded the army to follow me, 12 in total, my apostles. They didn't need guns or candlesticks to tear her to pieces. Lucifer would enjoy a new filthy consort. His barb cock would teach her exactly how foolish it was to sin. I saw her just ahead, scrambling over downed trees and rocks, of course, back to her rat's nest. Marching on, I let the situation breathe. Anticipation and anxiety did wonders for fear, and the whole would be terrified at this point. Maybe I'd let the undead have one last frolic between her thighs before taking her life. She might just like having the neighbours run a train on her. Fucking hot. As the cabin came into view, I saw her push over the bed, pressing furniture against the doors and windows. When I'd cased the place, I'd only seen 2 guns. There might be a hidden stockpile, or she might have stolen something dangerous from the dead. I couldn't be sure, but I knew tonight would be her last, regardless. My minions swarmed, others rising as we neared, holy energy enervating the corpses as we passed. A few skeletal masses tore their way from the earth. Some had once been buried pets, but others were bodies hidden to cover up murders. I happened to know that one of the nearby cousin fuckers kept her great-grandfather's skull on the mantel, with sunglasses on and a cigarette in his mouth. "Dig her out!" I growled and spat in my guttural mother tongue of the Nephilim. They surrounded the house while I waltzed in. It took no time at all to push and pull away her pitiful defences. They snatched and scrabbled, chomping and screeching, until she was surrounded by a circle of death. "You know what, little lady? I bet your old man would like to see this. Hell, I'll give him the first go." Bert's body crawled into the room, hitching and twitching, mouth open and gasping. "No, I want you," she whispered. That caught me off guard, and my hold on the undead wavered for a moment. They shuddered and went still. Tilting my head, I stared at her with newfound interest. "Explain yourself." She sat up, eyes pleading. "Say more time? I've never felt anything like you before. You fuck like an animal. Go back to Sterling. Take me sweet at first, then really fuck me. Send me to hell with one last good memory, please." In all my time of stalking the planet, I'd never heard such a request from one so close to damnation. Honestly, it was the hottest fucking thing I'd ever heard. I let my true form fade back into the bear-like man she'd met and sauntered over. "Hey, take off your clothes. This won't save you, little lady. You understand that?" I said, feeling excitement swell between my legs. She nodded. "I'm just a lost soul begging for joy before an eternity of punishment." With dead men watching from all sides, she stripped, spreading her thighs wide as an invitation. "Please?" I fell between her legs, licking at the sweet cunt nestled within. Sweat and blood and filth met my tongue. The zombies crumpled to macabre piles as I neglected their upkeep. She moaned, pressing my face deeper into her, and I lost myself in the act, throbbing with need. "Put it inside me," she whispered. "Fill me up, but be gentle. You were so rough earlier." Staring down at her, I could see what she meant. Both holes were broken, yet still she craved me. I could do that for her. She was so tight, swollen nearly shut, as I slowly pressed myself inside. Tears streamed from her eyes, but she arched her back in ecstasy. I threw my head back, closing my eyes at the exhilaration of the sensations I was experiencing. The tight, wet, ruined pussy of a sinner who's learned her place and admitted fault. I was so good at my job. The candlestick caught me off guard, slamming against my temple hard enough to crack bone. My world swam, but was interrupted by another blow, this time crushing my nose back into my face. I tried to rise, but her backhanded blow sent me reeling, spitting teeth and blood. Fuck, the candlestick must be made almost exclusively of iron. Opening my mouth, I roared, but it was cut short as she shoved the damn thing down my throat. From a long way off, I wondered if this was what it had felt like when I fucked her mouth, but the searing, boiling agony stole all thought and breath from me. There was a white flash and time froze. The pain subsided instantly and the implement pulled past my lips. I couldn't move anything but my eyes. The whore's face was contorted with rage, holding the candlestick in 2 hands like a spear. To my left, I saw a white robe with a blue sash and knew my Lord and Saviour had come. It was Jesus Christ in the flesh once more. The honour was tremendous, but I couldn't prostrate myself. I couldn't do anything. A moment later, the world blinked crimson for half a moment and sulphur burned my nostrils. It was the other him, the bad one. "Me damn it, Sterling, what are you doing?" Jesus sighed. His words were a rapture all their own. I hadn't heard that voice in person since the fall of Rome. I wept. His long hair was tied in a stylized man bun, as they called it these days, and his beard was twisted with rainbow ribbons. He lowered his sunglasses to stare at me. Lucifer lit a cigarette from the flame which danced along his fingertip before shaking it away. He wore a black business suit, expertly cut, with a crimson tie and pocket square to match. Each of the buttons was a tiny skull. His long, thin tail ended in a spade, 2 horns protruding from his neat, slicked-back black hair. He took a long drag, blowing a ring of smoke, then stepping through it. "I'll give it to you, Jesus. This one has sent a steady stream my way, which I appreciate. The machinations of hell don't function without fresh souls to run it all." That was the agreement, but he's gone too far. He took off the glasses and they disappeared in a puff of white. He's entrapping victims now and leading them to sin. Can't have that. He looked at me, down his nose with pity and disappointment. That broke me in a way I'd never felt. I'd rather have died 1,000 times than see that terrible sadness.
I appreciate his creativity, but it does muddy the agreement. He was only supposed to go for the worst of them. I'm nothing if not a man of my word. My morals are questionable at times, but we can't let this go on. Lucifer shook his head, releasing another puff of smoke through his nostrils. But what to do about it?
He squatted, meeting me on eye level, sizing me up, the great deceiver in all his unholy glory.
I can put things right, Jesus sighed. But it'll be messy. I'll have to talk to Dad and see what he thinks.
Satan shook his head. "The souls of the fallen are beyond the gates, yours and mine. They can't return to this world."
Technically no, but through God all things are possible. He might make an exception, Jesus shrugged.
I looked to the whore and saw her wide eyes darting back and forth between Jesus, Lucifer, and myself. I couldn't fathom the shock of an atheist seeing the truth. "Make me a deal, buddy. Give me this angel and the one he was just fucking, and I'll do what I can to clean this up. Maybe a meth explosion or something. I'll figure out the details." He stared me up and down before grinning maliciously. "I could handle a new piece of arse. It's been a while since I've fucked another angel."
Jesus chuckled. "Can you think without your cock for a minute?" "No, I can't." Lucifer stared at him blankly. "But sure, just this once." They stared at one another for a long minute. "Your offer is tempting, but we both know where tempting me gets you. But this woman isn't guilty of anything warranting an eternity in hell." He nodded to the whore.
Satan raised a finger. "Lust? I'm pretty sure lust is one of the big ones, yeah."
God is love. She loved her husband, and they agreed to playing with others. It was a mutual act of love. Sterling might have been a vibrator or a porno for all he meant to them. Godson shook his head. Nah, I appreciate the understanding between them. It says more of how humanity is evolving. That's why I love them so much. Cheeky little shits, but their creativity is endearing. Lucifer sneered, dropping his own glasses, which charred to ash before hitting the ground. "Oh, you don't have to tell me about how much you and your dad like them. You cast us out, picking them over his first creations. Forgive us if we, fallen, don't share your benevolent view."
It's a topic for another day. He pointed to each of us in turn. What do we do about this little mess?
Sure.
There were 3 things I was absolutely sure of. 1, that Jesus was standing in my home looking far too similar to the Big Lebowski for me to wrap my head around any of it. 2, I can't believe I'm even thinking it, but if Lucifer could lose the tail, he'd actually be kind of sexy. And 3, depending on how they handle all of this, I must just become a follower. Excuse me. Jesus? Great. My first time meeting an actual deity, and all I could do was fumble over my words. Jesus and Lucifer turned to face me. Slowly, seemingly unbothered to be standing amidst carnage.
"Hello, Marie?" Jesus smiled, extending his hand for me to take. "It's been a long time since I've heard from you, dear." I nodded, sheepishly studying the floor because how could I even begin to respond to that?
I took a deep breath and released a slow sigh. "Yeah, sorry about that. Well, you know my story." Jesus nodded and squeezed my hand. "That I do, dear, that I do. Please believe me when I say that your experience is not how Dad and Ghosty and I intended for religion to morph into."
I attempted to smile in return. "Do you think, well, I'm hoping it's possible to bring my friends and neighbors back." I squeezed his hand, desperately trying to shield my shock at the hole I felt in his palm.
This day couldn't get any fucking weirder.
I'll have to put in a call to Dad, I'm afraid, see what he thinks about all this, gesturing around at the predicament we stood in. Thankfully, my undead neighbors hadn't moved any closer, but the way they stood outside the windows, unmoving, just peacefully staring inside, still creeped me the hell out. As if sensing my discomfort, or hell, probably hearing my very thoughts since he's Jesus and all, he held both hands out in front of him and slowly pressed them towards the floor. At the same time, my friends sank to the ground, gently sitting, then lying down and closing their eyes.
Very chuckled. That's better. Now we can think.
Hey! I cried out, pointing towards the door where that slimy goat piece of shit Sterling was attempting to slide his way out of sight. Jesus and Lucifer laughed, together, a melody of malice and mercy intertwined as one sound. We haven't forgotten about you, Nephilim. Jesus motioned for Sterling to come closer.
Or that it was you that made all this mess, you damn idiot, Lucifer snarled.
I watched all three of them, unsure of what my place was in all of this now. I just wanted them to fix it and go, forever.
And go to church. I'll pray. I'll do better, my lords. I promise I will, Sterling pleaded his case with them both. Lucifer cackled, snapping his fingers, which suddenly placed Sterling in a chair, bound to it with black leather cords. Shut the heaven up, why don't you? Shut the heaven up. Yep, the day just got weirder for me. Jesus rolled his eyes and pulled up the sleeves of his soft, fuzzy robe. In an exaggerated flourish, he mimicked a phone with his hand, pretending to dial on his fingers, or hell, maybe actually dialing. I really couldn't tell what was actually happening at this point, or if I'd become completely unhinged from the trauma of today.
Oh, Dad, is that you? It's me. Well, I suppose it's you too. Ghostie's not here, but I've got a bit of an issue down on Earth.
Lebby Jesus standing in my home, talking on his hand as a phone to call Sky Daddy God way up on high, was really not on my bingo card for this lifetime.
I know. Again, you don't have to tell me what an issue these Nephilim have been from the get-go. Yes, I know. Yeah, I think Lukey's going to take care of him for us.
I nearly snickered at that. Lucy, how appropriate. I actually laughed when I noticed how all the colour had drained from Sterling's fucking face.
What a stupid fuck, huh? Yeah, so I'm thinking I'll pull a Lazarus on the rest of these people. What do you think about that? Remove their memories and fix them up as good as new, and then we, the humans, can get back to their little mundane lives. If it hadn't been the one with the supernatural prowess to bring my people back, I would have scoffed.
Jesus nodded, shaking his head. Yay, Dad. We'll talk about it later. I'll be back up there quick as a jiff. And with that, he clicked the apparent off button on his hand phone, verbal beep included, I wish I was kidding, and turned to me and Lucy with a smile.
Got the all clear. I'll give it a snap and your neighbors will be good as new, Marie. My knees nearly buckled underneath me even as the joyous sound of his fingers snapping together in one loud and thunderous boom. But I couldn't help but worry about the way he'd specifically said neighbors. Lucifer sat in a chair next to Sterling and propped his legs up on his new prize. Tears streamed down Sterling's face.
Jesus. My voice was shaking. What about my Bert? My husband, who was the first to die?
Jesus didn't say anything, only meeting my gaze with a smile and pointing behind me.
Dear God in heaven, who I still couldn't believe actually freaking existed, sauntering towards me with more sexiness than any man just brought back from the dead had any right to, was the sexiest, bearded, best friend I'd ever had in my life.
Bob, you're okay. Oh my...
Jesus cleared his throat and I blushed.
I laughed, clinging tight to my husband. Whoops, sorry, Jesus.
He laughed too. I'm just giving you a hard time, dear. We don't actually care about any of that trivial language business, but there is one more thing I need you to do for me. I tore myself away from Bert's lips to hear him out. Oh my gosh, of course. Anything you need. Lucifer raised his eyebrows, clearly in the know about what was coming. Jesus nodded his head towards Sterling, whom I'd almost completely forgotten was still here. Dad said he'd leave the decision up to you as to where we took Sterling. He's all about peace and second chances and blah, blah, blah. So he wanted to give you the option of sparing Sterling and sending him to the heavenly halfway house, where we would counsel and refine his less than savoury deficits in personality.
Bert wrapped one arm around my shoulders, squeezing my shoulders tight, wordlessly assuring me in our unspoken language that he was okay with Grace. My husband always was the forgiving type.
I looked from Lucifer to Sterling to Jesus to all of my neighbours and best friend Whitney, who now stood in our living room, waiting with bated breath to see what I chose.
Like Bert, I too was one with an indulging heart, as forgiveness was often more for the party scorned as a way to be at peace and move on rather than for the offender. But not this time.
Take that motherfucker to hell.